Hello, it's HunterHexin here. Today I will be discussing what will happen with the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild 2. Now, if you've played Breath of the Wild for about 5 minutes, you probably know what the Great Plateau is. As you start the game, it's the tutorial. But in Breath of the Wild 2, the tutorial will probably be in a different place, if there is one at all, because Majora's Mask didn't have a proper tutorial. After you get the paraglider from King Rome and you leave the plateau, there isn't much point of going back. Now, it's almost certain that the Great Plateau will have just something that you're able to do at it new in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. It's just what exactly will happen at the plateau. Now, in Breath of the Wild 2, Nintendo will probably be aiming for one dungeon in every province of the land. And the Great Plateau is its own province on the map of Hyrule. So there's a good chance that there will be a dungeon on the plateau, or the plateau itself is the dungeon. No one has a good idea on where the final boss and dungeon will be in Breath of the Wild 2. Some say Hyrule Castle, but that was the final dungeon in the first Breath of the Wild, and I have a theory on what will happen with Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild 2 in my Dungeons in Breath of the Wild 2 Part 2 video, link in the description. But the point is, I don't think that Hyrule Castle will be the final dungeon, but the Great Plateau could be the final dungeon. Now, there's not much evidence for the Great Plateau being the final dungeon. It's just that everywhere else is less likely. If you didn't start Breath of the Wild on the plateau, then it would be a pain to climb it. And if it was the final dungeon, it would be crawling with enemies to knock you down. And at the base of the plateau is a wall with an inner area which you can get to in the first Breath of the Wild. But if the Great Plateau is a dungeon in Breath of the Wild 2, then it will be one of the hardest dungeons and probably best dungeons in Zelda history. And if it is formatted like Hyrule Castle, which has a high potential, it could improve small details wrong with Hyrule Castle, which is not many, and then expand and add new cool things, which would make it even better than Hyrule Castle. And Hyrule Castle from Breath of the Wild was one of the best dungeons in Zelda history. Some people even say it is the best. Now, the plateau could have Molduga, Lynels, Stone Talisks, and new bosses as mini-bosses within the various rooms of the dungeon. And the only thing close to a mini-boss that we got in Breath of the Wild was when we went to go fight the Lynels inside Hyrule Castle would lock you in. But there were ways to escape. So in the Great Plateau, there is a potential that you could you're forced to fight it just like normal mini boss battles in previous installments. Then there is Breath of the Wild 2's tutorial. The Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild was by far the best tutorial in gaming history, at least that I know of and have heard of, but it could be better. Once you leave the Shrine of Resurrection, you have to go straight to the first tower. If you don't, you can't activate any shrines or any other towers. And you could say that you do need to activate the tower for the story to progress, but the whole idea for the Breath of the Wild was to make sure that gameplay outdoes everything, that it's a non-linear story, an open-world gaming experience. And having one of the highest amounts of linearity at the start breaks the first rule of Breath of the Wild. Now, don't get me wrong, the Great Plateau is amazing, but when I was trying to get footage from one of my previous videos about the Akala Citadel, I tried to get a shot of it without the tower in it, but the only way I could do that was get away from the plateau before activating the tower, and you can't do that even with glitches. So hopefully Breath of the Wild 2's tutorial won't make the same mistake in Breath of the Wild 2. Is also, if Breath of the Wild 2 is also a non-linear game. Do you think my theory could be right? Tell me in the comments below. I'll see you later.